All right. Hopefully this will work for all of us. Okay. So once Diane, where did Diane go? It's like herding cats. That's all good. That's all good. How's your weekend going, Jessica? Is it going okay? There she is. Hi, Diane. No, it's okay. Welcome to Borealis. Welcome to the fall variation of the Everything is Medicine series. We'll invocate and then we'll get into it. So you can put your things to the side and find a comfortable seat, whatever that means for you. And just because we can, we'll press the hands down on the tops of the thighs, inviting the thighs to descend. You might even start with eyes closed here, just releasing the sense organ of sight. And then taking the hands just to the front of the ribs today, front of the lower ribs. Very simply lifting. Just inviting the rib cage to ascend as the thighs descend. With the eyes closed here, just tune into the rhythm of your breath. I know when things are scheduled, when your life has a schedule, there's often a rushing that can occur, right? Oh, I have to be there at X time. And in that rushing, there tends to be a little loss of your own self-awareness. Most importantly, we lose track of the breath. So let's tune in here, just noticing inhalation and exhalation at the rib cage. Allowing the breath to lengthen and deepen as we settle in. And releasing the hands from the side ribs. Let's on an inhale lift the arms just to stretch the side ribs up, to lift and open the armpits, to extend through the fingertips, to allow spaciousness to be felt in the ribs and the lungs and the chest. And on an exhalation, float the hands down, landing them palm up somewhere on the legs. Relaxing the fingers and the thumbs. And notice again your breath, the inhalations, exhalations as they come to you. Take the time to notice the texture, the temperature, the tempo. And then bringing your hands together in front of your heart, palm against palm, fingers elongating, lifting the sternum into the thumbs. Let's chant the sound of Om together 3 times. Exhaling fully. Inhaling fully. The 3 mantras that we'll be working with a little bit. If you don't know them, don't worry about it. You can just sit and listen. If you do know them and want to join in, you're welcome to do so. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvashavahai Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amratam Gamaya. Guru Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshvaraha, Gurur Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May we be protected together, may we be nourished together, may our studies be filled with brilliance and light, may there be no hatred here. May we find our way from the unreal to the real, from darkness to the light, from death to immortality. And may we keep in mind that the teacher is the creator, the sustainer, and the destroyer, and the teacher is all cycles of life, right? From that we learn. Life is our teacher. Peace between us, peace within us, and peace between us and the natural world. On an exhale, bow your head towards your heart. Gently releasing the hands, slowly opening the eyes. It's like flipping a switch when we chant our mantra. The energy changes and we change. Even if you're just listening, there's a whole energetic shift. Welcome. So some of us know each other, some of us don't know each other, so would you be willing to just say your name and perhaps maybe one word or two words of well, let's say a sentence of why you're here and what you're hoping for. Share.
Jello baby. Blending seasons with food and cycles. Blending all the cycles. That's right. I'm married. I know almost nothing about Ayurveda, so I'm just here to keep going.
Awesome.
I'm Jessica. I'm from Jane. I know I just know a little bit of, some of the stuff I've heard from you, some of the stuff I've heard from you over the years.
Right.
It's really the text.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'm Meryl, and I took some classes at my lectures. It was really for power and like these 2-hour lectures. I thought, I learned little bits, and then we said you're doing classes. It would be great.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
excited.
Nice. Well, thanks for being here.
I'm Diane, and I'm here and talking about Ayurveda, but I've been curious to know more, and so it's an exciting opportunity
Awesome.
to learn.
Yeah. It's an awesome opportunity to be here, to teach and to learn, because you can't teach this without learning more as you teach it. It's just kind of what happens. So let's start from ground floor. What does this word mean, Ayurveda? Does anyone want to gander a guess? I keep using wrong English idioms this week. That's my thing. But so Veda, you've probably heard that word before. Not Darth Vader, obviously, but the Veda it's the Rig Veda, right? We've got the different scriptures that are in yoga that you hear about. Usually it's the Rig Veda or the Upanishads or another source of Veda. Veda means science or study of or kind of the knowledge of. And Ayus is life. So that's what Ayurveda is. It's the science of, the study of, the knowledge of life. Now that's not too lofty of a subject, is it? Right? I know. I asked one of my teachers, I was like, it's so frustrating. I am in school and I'm like, I don't know what's happening, all this Sanskrit, what's going on? And he's like, It might not be this lifetime or the next lifetime. It might take you several lifetimes, but you'll get it. I was like, what? I'm not going to get it in this lifetime? And he just laughed and walked away. And he was our Swami. He was this tall. He was probably 7 foot tall. He was an American, but he looked like Dumbledore from Hogwarts. He had the big beard and the orange robes, and he was our Sanskrit teacher. He was very mystical, and he sounded like Dumbledore too. He'd always speak in these kind of abject riddles where we were like, I don't know what he just said, but boy, it was deep. So that's where that comes from. But here's another way to look at it. So let's look at the Ayurvedic definition of health, because when most people think about Ayurveda, that's really what they're looking for. They're looking for what is health, right? Because you wouldn't be here if part of you wasn't interested in being more healthy. Is that safe to assume? Yeah? So, and I'll read it in Sanskrit and then we'll go over in English. So it's samadosha sama agnischa sama dhatu mala kriyaha prasana atma indriya manaha swasta itya vidite. One who is established in self, who has balanced doshas, don't worry if you don't know what that word means yet, balanced digestion, properly formed tissues, proper elimination of wastes, well-functioning bodily processes, and whose mind, soul, and senses are full of bliss, is called a healthy person. Does anyone know what the definition of health according to the World Health Organization is? It's a person who is free from disease. That's it. They don't care about anything else, really. But isn't it interesting that the Ayurvedic definition of health mentions whose mind, body, and soul are full of bliss, right? And one of the words for health in Sanskrit is swastha, which you may have heard in yoga. It means to be seated in the self. And that's a healthy person, to be seated in the self. Now that's also a lofty goal, I think, because how often are you fully seated in yourself? Truly. And we all do this. We're all constantly drawn out of ourself by our sense organs, right? So Ayurveda is one of its goals is to get us to really be here, present, now, this moment, constantly returning to the now. Ayurveda is very old. It's probably about 5,000 years old, although some texts say 10,000 years old. It has the designation as being the longest continuously practiced form of medicine in the world. And some people are like, well, what about Chinese medicine? Well, they say, this is where the scholars go head to head, where they're like, well, maybe it was, maybe this was, maybe that was. But they actually say that a lot of the Chinese medicine got derived from Ayurveda in its initial form. And Ayurveda is considered a divine science, and this is where if you're not able to go down esoteric pathways, this can become a little like, really? You know, people get a little disbelieving. Like, really? No, really? So the idea is that there are rishis, which are ancient seers, these ancient sages back in the day, and they would sit in samadhi, they'd sit in meditation and just on things in life, and trickle down information started to come to them about how things worked in the body and them and lives. So they started kind of percolating this information and then applying it to their daily lives and seeing that it worked. And as they started realizing this, they started telling other people. And Ayurveda was generally considered a verbal tradition, like yoga was a verbal tradition. Nothing used to be written down until very recently. I mean, I think the books on, the Rig Veda wasn't written, it was sung to people, and the different treatises on Ayurveda were never written down, they were sung. So these shlokas, these songs came to the rishis, that's the information that they disseminated, right? So that's why a lot of our information, like the Ayurvedic definition of health, is meant to be sung. It's a mantra in its own right. And we call it a shloka, which just means basically song with information in it. So when we talk about life, we mean everything, right? So we mean all the metaphysical and physical aspects. It's not just this biological form that you have here. Ayurveda looks at the soul as well, and the soul is the bit that's traveling, right? It's the bit that gets put into another body again and again and again. The idea is that this is the vehicle that we're in now, and eventually this vehicle will either become infirm due to age or illness, and eventually it will expire, but our soul will continue on, right? That's the idea. And if you don't believe in the soul, that's okay. That Ayurveda does it for you. You don't have to worry about it. And it's not, I would venture also to say at this time, it's not a religion. And you don't need to be religious you don't need to be Hindi to practice Ayurveda the same way you don't need to be Hindi to practice yoga. You just need to be open to the concept that there are things out there greater than ourselves. And that's where this comes from. So we think of the macrocosm, right? Everything in the universe that isn't us, and then the microcosm, the us. And Ayurveda looks at the macrocosm as being reflected in the microcosm. And we see this as our environmental things change, we change, right? So if it's cold, you get cold, right? If it's hot, you get hot. And that's a very simple way to put it, but that's the macrocosm affecting the microcosm. Does that make sense? Incidentally, as we talk, if you have a question, if I've said something that seems completely ludicrous, please raise a hand, say something. It's more of a conversation than me up here talking for 2 hours or whatever it is. It is a medical science, so it can be used to treat disease in acute fashion, but what it's more based on is preventative medicine, which is why there aren't huge Ayurveda clinics here, because you can't make money off prevention, right? No one's interested in it. You can't, if you tell people if they eat right, they won't get sick, no one's going to be interested in that, because if nobody gets sick, they don't make money, right? The Western model is a little skewed. So in that it's a preventative science, it means that it's supposed to be practiced every day, which can seem a little daunting, especially if this is new information. You're like, wow, every day I've got to do stuff. But I have to say is once you get into the whole flow of it, it starts to get easier and easier. All right. So Ayurveda gives us the tools to figure out who and what we are. Because as you've probably noticed in your life, you are not the same as any other person. There's only one Meryl in the world. That's you, I think. Do you have a clone? No. Fantastic. There's only one Jessica. There's only one Mary. There's only one Cheryl. There's only one Diane. Thank God there's only one Veronica. Right? So there's no one else like you. So when you, Mary, eat a piece of pita bread, it affects you in one way. If Meryl eats that same piece of pita bread, depending on her constitution, it's going to affect her totally different, right? If your immunity is strong, nothing's going to bug you, right? You're not going to get a cold, you're not going to get a flu. However, those same bugs, say they're swirling around Diane, and for whatever reason, Diane's got a niche in her armor, and the immune system's not doing the same thing. Those same bugs will affect her. Western model of medicine doesn't look at it like that. The Western model says human, human, female, human, female, human, female, right? That's it. The only designation they make is usually due to your age or your gender. Doesn't matter if, say, you're thinner or you're taller or you're got bigger feet. Right? I don't know how big your feet are, but do you see what I'm saying? So Ayurveda takes the microphone, takes the magnifying glass to you and says, what was your mom and dad like? Because when your dad's sperm hit your mom's ovum, that's when your constitution was decided. That never changes. But as life happens, things start to change, and it can mask that. So that's what we're trying to look at here, is what has happened to you over time that's made you even more individual than what you were before, right? Because I'm guaranteeing your life is different than hers and hers and hers, right? Different than mine. So that can change what happens to you. That can change how you react to that same piece of pita bread or to that flu bug, right? So that's one of the many things we're going to look at ideally it's a science of self-knowledge and self-study, so svadhyaya, right? Yoga is the same way, self-knowledge, self-study. That's why a daily practice is so important, because every time you show up on the mat, you might be a little different, and that gives you the information you need to decide how to practice. Let's all exhale with that. That's a lot of information. Take a deep inhale. Exhale. Letting it out. So I've written here, yoga and Ayurveda both seek to balance the flow of vital force, prana, in the body. So does everyone know what prana is? Does everyone feel like they have a good grasp on what prana might be? And it could just be like it's energy, right? Is that work? It's akin to the same thing as qi in Chinese medicine. And you notice it in other people. It's that thing like when you meet someone and you're like, oh wow, I really like their energy. That's their prana that you're tuning into. Or if you're not feeling so great, you feel a little stuck, that's your prana that's gotten stuck, right? Because it's not like you're all of a sudden literally stuck in anything, but your energy gets stuck. We've all felt that. So that's important to know that Ayurveda, like yoga, is trying to get the proper flow of prana, right? We're trying to open up the channels, remove stagnation, and allow prana to flow in its proper form. All right, little history, and this is a fun story, and let's make sure I tell it correctly because it's kind of cute. So the base myth surrounding Ayurveda, the way they've mythed it out, if that's even a way to put it, other than the rishis receiving the knowledge, and this is the myth that they've created around that rishi knowledge transmission, is that thousands and thousands of years ago, the gods and the demons were fighting, as they're wont to do, right? Because they don't really get along. And the gods and the demons were told that if they churn this ocean of milk, stick with me here, I know. There's an ocean of milk, first off, you should know that. And they were going to churn it. And to churn it, they had to use this mountain, all right? And they churned it with this mountain. They used a snake as the churning rope. I know, they got a lot of don't even get me started on Ganesh. So they're churning and they're churning this timeless battle of good and evil, and they were trying to get the nectar of immortality, because the gods and the demons both wanted to live forever, right? Because who doesn't want to live forever? I mean, that's really what we want to do. So Vishnu, who's one of the big gods, right? He's up there with Krishna and Brahma, and they're all basically the same guy, but they all wear different, when he's wearing a different coat, basically, he's a different god. Vishnu said, all right, churn this ocean of milk, the nectar of immortality, come out, it would be great. So they're churning, we're churning. They have to work together. The ocean released then several things as they were churning, including the god Tanvantri, who is the patron saint of Ayurveda. And he had the nectar of immortality, which is called Amrita, in one hand, and the knowledge of Ayurveda in the other. Apparently it could fit in one hand because he's a god, and that's how things work, right? And so that information was what was passed, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier. One of the other things that came out, and I didn't write it down here, was Danvantu, who is the wish-fulfilling cow, which if you ever want to hear that story, I can bring it. I have it at home, and it's why we needed a wish-fulfilling cow, I have no idea, but apparently it was necessary. Let's touch on a little bit of the philosophy that goes along with this style of medicine, this style of consciousness. We won't go there too long, because philosophy, for me at least, I find it to get a little dull. We get a little mired in the details, and not a lot of information comes out of it. However, if you are a philosophical scholar and you would like to learn more about it, I can point you in the direction of several books that are, if you're not interested, will just put you to sleep. But if you are, if you suffer from insomnia, they're great. But we had to read them. It was very challenging. So Sankhya philosophy is the oldest, and it's expressed as a model of everything involving consciousness, from the non-material to the material. And so this is where we get a bit heady. So where did we come from, right? How did this earth come to be? How did we come to be? And people are like, oh, evolution there. Oh, then whatever I forget what the one with God is, or whatever it is. But this philosophy is evolution. and God, right? So everybody's right, which is kind of cool. So according to Sankhya, before there was a manifestation of the universe, there was the absolute. So there's our God, right? He was unmanifested state, or he or she, it doesn't really matter, but it was in an unmanifested state in which existed Purusha and Prakriti. So Purusha is the pure consciousness that lives in the experience of the senses. So Purusha is when you see light, you know it's light, right? It's the ultimate truth, the ultimate hearing power, the ultimate enlightenment. The way to consider it in your own self, it's like your intuition, right? When you know something to be true without having to be told, or you know, say, you know something's going to be good for you, even if you don't necessarily know what it is, right? And I think, unfortunately, in our society, we've gotten away from trusting our intuition. And even on a personal level, I've noticed that happens to me sometimes, where I just get so lost in my sense organ input that I can't even see that maybe taking a cup of tea would be a good idea, or something of that nature. And I think that's one of the reasons why we fall ill in this society especially. But that's because we stop listening to that absolute consciousness, that Purusha. Prakriti, pra means first, kriti means formation, and it's the creative energy of Purusha. It's the manifestation of that absolute energy that ends up being all the physical things we have around us, right? It's the manifestation of everything in the cosmos. It gives us that combination of the Maha Trigunas, which you've probably heard the words Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas in yoga before. Some of you might have. No? Diane's looking at me like, no, I've never heard that. And we'll study Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas more in the future, but right now what you need to know is that Sattva is generally what we're aspiring to. It's light, it's clarity, it's when you're feeling good and balanced and solid, and really balance is a great way to put it. And I'm trying to see, do I go into it? Oh, I do. So it's pure essence, bliss, wholesomeness, purity, and virtue, light, goodness, right action, and spiritual purpose. It is perception. It's that feeling you get when you fully cleaned your house, everything's where it's supposed to go, and you just feel so balanced and blissful. You know that feeling? At one point in your life, Jessica, you had your room clean and it felt great. One day. Imagine you went to someone else's house that was totally clean and clear and everything was put away. Rajas is a principle of action. It's volatility. It determines movement, the momentum of creation. Through Rajas, consciousness becomes matter. So Rajas is what allows us to do things, right? Sattva is the bliss. Rajas is the action that can help us get there. We need all three. Don't take sattva as the end-all, be-all. Tamas, on the other hand, is the principle of inertia. It's just potential energy. It's heaviness, dullness, darkness. It brings sleep and inaction. So we need tamas to go to sleep. We need rajas to wake up. And in between, there's the sattva. Does that make sense? I know these are pretty heady subjects, so if you're starting to get a little mired down, don't worry about it. Things will become clearer as we go. And any questions that you start to have will be answered as we continue. But if you have something that's pressing, please let me know. So after Purusha, after Prakriti comes Mahad. Mahad is the supreme universal consciousness. It's why a bird knows how to be a bird. It's why a bone cell knows how to be a bone cell. It's why Mary Baker's Mary Baker and Mary Finkel is Mary Finkel, right? That's the Mahad. And then comes the ahamkara, the ego. That's why you are you. That's why you know that you are you. That's why Diane knows she's Diane. Why Cheryl knows she's Cheryl. And the ahamkara is what we're constantly trying to like chill out, right? Because the I-ness gets pretty beefy. Like, I am Cheryl, right? Or I am Jessica. It's like, whoa, chill out. I am Veronica. Settle. Right? We just discussed Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Right? Then we come to the sense faculties. right? The 5 sense faculties. Now this is where things start to get graspable, no pun intended. This is where we start to get down to the really physical areas of things. So we have the sense faculties. So we know these, right? We have hearing, ears, skin for tactile, vision, eyes, taste, tongue, smell, nose. Makes sense, right? We know these things. Then we have the kramendriyas, the faculties of action. These relate directly to the motor cords, the motor organs. So we've got speech, the vocal cords, which is related to our hearing, our ears, right? We've got giving and receiving through our hands, which relates directly to our skin and tactile perception, okay? We've got walking, which relates directly to our legs, which relates to vision in the eyes, because if you can't see where you're going, you can't walk there, right? Then we've got procreation, which obviously relates to the genitals, and on the flip side of that is the tongue. It's often said that the genitals are the mouth of the lower half of the body, right? And I've heard this discussed in other traditions as well. And then finally we've got excretion, which is the excretory organs, which is related to the nose. And I've had many teachers try to help me understand why the excretion is related to the nose. And the idea is that especially the elimination of feces, it's one of the things that we release that has a smell to it. And that smell is earthy and relates to the nose. And that'll make more sense as we go through the objects of perception and then the elements. So we've got 5 ton mantras, or objects of perception, and these ones are pretty easy, right? Sound for the ears, touch for the hands, form for the legs and the eyes, because when we were first able to see, we see forms. Taste is in the mouth with the tongue, and then odor or smell, here we go, right, with the nose, excretion. And then the elements, ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And there's a handy little chart here which kind of shows you how they relate together. And don't worry if it doesn't totally make sense. This concept takes a little while to sit in, especially because we're not used to thinking of our legs as being related to our eyes, or our nose as being relating to our excretory organs, right? But this is how these things relate in Ayurveda. So all of that was so that we can start talking about the elements. How are we doing? So far, so good? Let's take another deep breath. Inhaling. Exhaling. Right? That's the heady stuff, and I'll be honest, we try to go through it a little quickly so that we can get to the stuff that you can grasp onto a little bit better. But I would be remiss as a teacher if I didn't talk about where this all comes from. And again, if you're interested in learning more about it, let me know and we can go a little deeper. So in Ayurveda, we think of everything as being made up of the 5 elements: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. That's more comfortable, right? I could feel a little relaxation happen in the room. That's good. Let's start with ether. Let's start with ether. What is ether? Well, it's space. Ether is space. Before you came here, had you ever thought about the ether before? Not really? Well, nature abhors a vacuum, right? So there needs to be something for all of this to reside in, right? The other 4 elements need something to reside in, so they reside in space. Without space, we wouldn't literally have any room to be. Ayurveda looks at these elements through their qualities, right? So we look at everything in kind of, let's call it their descriptive terms, right? So looking at ether, it's not hot, right? It's cold. It's not wet, it's dry. It's not heavy, it's light. Right? We'll start with those ones. It's the element in which sound transmits. And so the idea is that one element is begot from the next, begot from the next, begot from the next. So sound travels through the ether. As a matter of fact, they say that everything came into creation through the utterance of the sound of Om, right? That the vibration of the sound of Om is what caused our existence. And that's a rabbit hole we can go down at some point, but right now let's just leave it there. Ether is all-pervading, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. Let's think about it in our bodies. So any space in the body is ether, right? You have a lot of it, believe it or not. It might be filled with food or fluid or feces or what have you, but there's space. So there's space most obviously in your ears, in your mouth, and your nose, right? There's also space in a little bit of space in your skull. There's space between nerve endings. There's space between synapse endings in the brain. There's space in the bones. There's space in your lungs. There's space in your belly. The most amount of space is in your colon, right? There's a lot of space there. It's generally filled with food and other things, but when it's not filled with food and other things, it's empty space. Okay? That'll come up again. So next we go to the next element. So as ether has sound transmitted through it, that vibration caused wind. And so we have from that wind, that's the element of air, or vayu, air. And again, we can look a little bit at its qualities to kind of grasp a better understanding. So again, air, it doesn't have any fire in it, so it's cold. It doesn't have any water in it, so it is also dry. No earth, it's light. Let's see. It's mobile, right? We just said that. It comes from wind, so it's mobile. Wind tends to be not so much soft, but it's usually rough, right? The Grand Canyon was formed both from water, but from the wind pushing the water, right? So we can say that it's rough. It's not a gross element, right? There's no kind of massiveness to it or weight to it, so we could say that it's subtle, yes? Where does wind happen in the body? Where does air happen in the body?
Lungs.
Lungs, that's the most obvious one.
Farts.
Farts, yeah, that's when wind has gotten out of control in the body. It's anywhere there's movement, actually. Like the blinking of your eyes, that's air element. The motion of your hand on your wrist, that's also air element. The movement of food from your mouth to your anus, that's air element. It's the thoughts in your mind. Those are moving on air element because they're moving, right? Thoughts are moving. They're very, very rarely still. So anything that moves in the body, the beating of the heart, the expanding of the lungs, right? Anything in the nervous system. All right. Moving on to my favorite element, and a lot of people's favorite element, especially in this time of year, fire, also known as Agni. And Agni is an important word to know. Agni is fire. Fire is considered one of the most important things in most of the Vedas. I think it's the Rig Veda that starts out Om Agni. And any of these scriptures, any of these old books, they always start with the most important thing, the summation of everything. And usually you just have to read the first word and you know what the book's about. And in this particular one, it's Agni, it's fire. Fire is everything. So fire is fire, so it's what? It's hot, right? It's not heavy though, right? Would you think fire is heavy? No, it's light. Tends to be sharp, right? It's not dull. So we could call it sharp. See, what else is it? It doesn't move. It's, believe it or not, fire is considered stable. I know, that's a weird thing to think about it. Fire won't move unless there's wind. If you light a candle and you have it on your desk and it's in a still environment, does it move? Not generally. It only moves if there's wind, right? There has to be wind for that, so we can call it stable. We'll add more as we go. Where's fire in the body? Where's Agni in the body? Digestion. That's a big one. Yeah, it's digestion. There's also fire in your eyes, right? Because you can't see without light, right? So the external light needs a receptor in your eyes. So there's fire in the eyes. There's fire in your enzymes that help you break things down. Body temperature, thinking processes, vision, they're all controlled by fire. All controlled by fire. And then, so from wind, from that vibration of wind comes the heat that starts the fire then burning, it starts to create heat, which creates condensation, which gives us the water element, or Ap, or Jala. It's got a couple of different names. Water's cold, huh? Water's not hot, we'll call it cold. It's stable. Water doesn't move without wind. That's usually a hard one for people to digest, but if I put a drop of water on the floor and I left it, it wouldn't go anywhere. And people are like, but the ocean. Well, it's actually, that's gravity. That's not the water itself. It's dull, right? Water's not sharp. It's got a dullness to it. I mean, it can, when it's being propelled by the air element and it gets forceful, yeah, it can be sharp, but most people would say water is dull. And it's heavy, right? Water has weight to it. It's heavy. Now this is a pretty easy one. Where's water in the body? Everywhere. Kind of, yeah. It's in your mouth, it's in your eyes, it's in your nose, it's in your blood, it's in your plasma, it's in your lymph, it's everywhere. Cytoplasm, love that word. And then finally, the water, it solidifies and it becomes earth. I don't have apparently use orange. So then we have earth, and earth is the most stable element of all, right? Earth is also known as Prithvi, which interestingly enough is similar to the word for poop, which is Purusha, Prakriti, Prithvi. Prithvi is also can be said as, it also means poop. All right, so earth is stable, right? It's not hot, it's cold. It's not sharp, I don't think. Do you? So we can call it dull. It's definitely not light, right? So we'd call it heavy. So it's stable, it's cold, it's dull, it's heavy. What else is it? I think that's enough. It's similar to water in a lot of things. It's dry though, whereas water is wet. Right? Well, it's the wrong color, but that's okay. So far so good. We can agree on these things. Beautiful. Where is earth in the body? Poop. That's where earth is going out of the body.
Bones?
Bones. Yeah, bones. Any of the structure in the body is earth. Any of the structure in the body is earth. Another deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. I'm going to erase this now, and we're get into the doshas. So that's what a lot of people are familiar with when they think about Ayurveda. They think about the doshas, right? Have you ever heard that? Like, what's your dosha? What's your dosha? There's actually a website someone started called What's Your Dosha Baby? And I think her idea was that the dosha theory would become dating theory. Just kind of, I'm sure, makes some of my Ayurvedic teachers cringe. I find it hilarious. Right, what's your dosha, baby? Is your dosha going to line up with mine? Does anyone have an idea of what their dosha is?
Taking all those like quizzes, you know, you do these quizzes to figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah. You don't remember what you came out
It was
as?
like half, it was 50-50, I think, for me. Not the tired one, the other two, after the other two, three or four.
Vata and Pitta?
Vata and Pitta.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Vata.
Quizzes.
So those quizzes can be good and bad. What's interesting, we touched on this a little bit, was that your constitution, your doshic makeup, is derived from your mom and your dad in that instant when the sperm meets the egg, and that's it, right? Then your prakriti, your dosha, your constitution is decided. So we really can't say what's your dosha to people, though, because dosha means that which can get out of whack. It's that which has gotten up to no good. Doshas are very, they're mischievous. They're what lead us into illness, actually. They're what goes, people come from what they were, right? Their prakriti is what we call it. Their prakriti is their constitution, right? That's your beginning baseline. And then life happens, as we discussed, and you have what's called your vikriti. Your vikriti is when the doshas have got out of balance, and then we call them doshas, right? So what are doshas? Doshas are the combination of elements organized in such a way that they made sense to the rishis, and actually when you start to look at them, make sense in us. And we'll start with the first one that manifests in our body. We'll start with kapha dosha. Kapha dosha. Kapha, which is that which stabilizes, or that which is structure. Say stabilize. And it's the mixture of earth and water. When earth and water come together, what do they make? Mud. Yeah, unfortunately. When kapha is out of balance, that's what we get. We get muddy. But it's interesting to note that we all have all three doshas in the body. You all have all 5 elements in your body. And that difference of what percentage of each element you have is what makes you you. And these elements come together to make kapha dosha in the body and the food you eat in the environment. It can be different percentages of this earth and water that make up that kapha in you. Say, person A has more earth in their kapha, they have a drier kapha. Person B has more water in their kapha, they have a wetter kapha. Tendencies are for kapha to be unctuous. Does everyone know what that means, unctuous? Slimy, kind of. You ever eaten okra? That stuff in the middle with the boogers? Nasty snot. I hate okra, sorry. I think I need a bumper sticker that says, vegetarians against okra. But unctuous is that. And unctuous is in our body, right? So unctuous is in our mucous membranes, and it's our synovial fluid is unctuous, right? That slimy substance that's in the joints that keeps them moving without the cracky, right? It's when that starts to dry up that we get that cracky, but that's vata, and we'll get there. Kapha is also cool. right? It's not hot. There's no fire element. What does cool mean for us? Well, it can be cool skin. Kaphas tend to have cooler skin. Kapha dosha people, I should say, have cooler skin. They can have a cooler attitude. Kapha people tend to be real chill individuals. They're not easily ruffled. They're your people that you're like, the house is on fire. And they're like, yeah, we'll get up in a minute. It's going to be okay. Right? They're the ones that you want in your corner in an emergency because they're always calm even though everything else might be blowing up. Right? Kapha's also slow. Because when you try to pour earth and water, mud, what does it go very quickly? Not usually. It's usually pretty slow. Slow here, in as far as humans are concerned, relates to digestion and metabolism for the most part, right? They tend to have slower digestions. They tend to have slower metabolism, which is why they tend to put on weight and then not be able to get that weight off. But it takes them a while to put it on, but it also then takes a while to get it off. They also tend to process things a little slower. Incidentally, though, they never forget. Kapha people always remember everything. Slowness can also be of their speech patterns. I don't know if any of you have Kapha friends, but they're the ones that take like 20 minutes to explain something you're sure should have only taken probably 5 seconds, right? Where they're just talking at their pace. It's all good. They're going to get there. Just got to be patient. Smooth. Kapha's smooth, right? Because mud is generally smooth. Earth and water tend to be, when together, smooth things. Smooth here relates to usually they have very smooth skin. They have smooth hair follicles. Generally speaking, the Kaphas I know at least, their hair is to die for. They just have this beautiful, smooth, silky hair. And they tend to have a smooth way with them. They're the ones that can probably talk you into stuff you wouldn't normally want to be talked into, but they do it from this smooth, loving place that you're like, okay, yeah, I'll bake cookies for the bake sale that I didn't want to do, but I'll do it now, right? They're soft, right? They're not hard. And soft here in the body, they tend to have softer skin, they have softer organs, they're usually not hard and angular. They're the ones you love to hug, because it's like hugging this nice, warm, soft cushion, right? They're great. They also have this wonderful, soft look to them, generally speaking. I always think of cows. And I know that's horrible, but if you look at cows in India, they've just got these beautiful soft features and these big soft eyes. You just want to hug them, or I do. And I did. I hugged so many cows in India. So Kapha is also dense. And that can be a denseness to their muscles, a denseness to their bones. Kapha people tend to not break bones, ever, no matter what they're doing. I've seen, like, my cat has a lot of kapha in him, and he has fallen off things badly and not hurt himself somehow. My husband is also kapha. He's played every sport there's known to man, and he's never broken anything, which is unbelievable. They can also be dense in the organs and joints. They tend to have denser pads of fat around their bodies. It's just how they're built. It's just their property. Stable. Like the smoothness, like the coolness, they tend to also be extremely stable, which is why they're your friend that you can like freak out next to, and they're like, it's gonna be okay. Like, it's all good. Just breathe. Settle down, right? Stability here means they're generally stable in their joints. They also tend to be the ones that you can't knock over, right? Kaphas are also static, which goes along with stable, right? I think stability and the ability to be static are together. Because of this, Kaphas tend to get stuck when out of balance. So they're the kind of people that are on the couch, and they're on the couch even if the house is burning down. Like, you have to really put a fire under them to get them up and out.
My daughter couldn't get off the floor this morning. She's 15, but she's like lying on the floor.
Yeah.
She's like,
She's being
Yeah.
stable,
Yeah.
static, steady. She's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
They're also, every Kapha person I've ever known, like if you run into them, you bounce off, but they stay put, right? Cloudy. Kapha dosha people, Kapha prakriti people tend to have a cloudiness sometimes, especially when out of balance, because earth and water are not clear. Kapha is the only prakriti that really should be allowed to drink coffee. No one ever wants to hear that, because all my Pitta people are like, give up coffee. And all my Vatas are like, I can't give up coffee. I need my coffee. I have to have my coffee. Like, you don't need coffee. You need to chill. But Kaphas, because they have that cloudiness, they can really tolerate it. They need that little fire from the coffee to clear out the cloudiness. And when we get into the times of day, this will make a little more sense too. Viscosity, it's just cohesion, right? Mud, kapha, earth and water tends to be viscous. In the body, it's all that, again, like unctuous. It's the sliminess and all that. And it also can be attachment. Viscous material is very clingy. And kaphas, when out of balance, can also be clingy. They tend to not be good with change so much, even if it would be good for them, right? And we know that in a lot of people. Is this starting to sound like anyone you know? Maybe even you're recognizing some of it in yourself, which is totally fine. I think kaphas, so I found out, I saw my Ayurvedist and one of my teachers yesterday, and she was telling my husband, kaphas are a minority in this country. Genetically speaking, we have less kapha prakriti people than vata and pitta. And as we start talking about those, you'll see that our society is not a kaphic society, but we need to be at least kapha in balance, because kaphas are slow and stable, calm. They tend to live longer, really. People who have kapha prakriti tend to live longer because if they're taking care of themselves, their organs are built to withstand it. Kaphas tend to have really good immunity as well. Again, though, they have to take care of themselves, because as soon as they put on the weight or they start to let the blood pressure and cholesterol go out of hand, it can be really damaging to them. Kapha people have deep memories. I like to relate them as to elephants, not because they're big like elephants, but because they have that nature towards them. They're soft, they're loving, and they have good memories. Incidentally, there's in each of the doshas, there's sub-doshas, and one of the sub-doshas of kapha relates to memory. It's their tarpaka kapha, and it's the film in which memories are imprinted on. So if you have a person who's already got kapha in their prakriti, it stands to reason they've got good tarpaka kapha, the good memory juice, right? As opposed to vatas that have, like, they can't keep their minds on anything. They forget everything. But when we get there, you'll kind of see that. They tend to be, when out of balance, towards attachment, greed. They can be stubborn. They can be possessive. They have to watch out to be lazy. Kaphas don't want to move because they're static and stable. But unlike the other doshas, they're the ones that need to be runners. They need to go zoom around. They need to get moving. And they can tolerate it. Kapha times of day are roughly, and this depends on where the sun is rising and setting in your area, roughly 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. to 10 p.m.
What does that mean? Do people with this tendency are best at this time?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So this is when this dosha is at its highest amount in our environment every day. So we, as humans, follow a circadian rhythm, right? And so if you're really paying attention to the circadian rhythm, which correlates to the sun, you'll notice that earth and water elements are higher in prevalence between 6 a.m., p.m., 10 a.m., 10 p.m. That means that you may feel the effects of those elements greater at that time. That's everyone. That's not just if you have that in your prakriti. That's everyone. So, easy experiment. How many people wake up after 6 a.m., after the sun rises, like way after the sun rises? Really? Yeah? And when you wake up before the sun rises, do you feel differently? Oh, yes. If you wake up before the sunrise, and this is an experiment I've done. So when you wake up later than the sunrise, you tend to feel more groggy, right? More slow, more dense, more cloudy, right? All of those things that are prevalent with kapha. However, if you wake up before 6 a.m., before kapha's had a chance to rise, you tend to feel clearer, more attentive, more capacity to really process information and figure out what's going on, right? You're clearer overall. So if you ever wanted to perform that experiment, you totally could. On the flip side of that, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., this is when we tend to be coasting down for bedtime. And that's, you can feel, you ever feel heavier at night? Like it gets to be 6 or 7 p.m. and I'm like, I'm all done. I need to go lay down. I need to go be still. And that's when we can harness that kapha energy to get us into bed by, 10 o'clock, 11 at the latest. I know it depends on where the sun is rising and setting where we are. Okay? Incidentally, kapha time of year. What sounds like a kaphic time of year? Winter, late winter, especially, and spring, right? Because what's happening in spring? Everything's melting, everything's getting gooey. There's literal mud. We call it mud season, right? So late winter and spring. Okay? Last bit, what's the kapha time of life? When do you think, what's the most kaphic you've ever been? When have you been the most wet and sticky and gooey and stable? When you were a baby. Babies are kaphic, right? And of course there's variations within the baby, because you can have pitta babies in their kaphic time of life, but babies are little snot factories, right? They're just mucusy. That's all they do. And, I don't have children. I love children when they're clean and other people's. No, they're super sweet. But that's when, crying is kapha. Mucus is kapha. When you have a cold, we say that you have excess kapha. And we try to keep you away from kapha-inducing foods and liquids and things like sugar is very kaphic, and wheat is very kaphic, and mangoes, anything that dairy, right? So if we think about anything that produces mucus in the body is a kaphic food, right? And if we're trying to reduce that, then we'd avoid those foods. What? Mangoes are sweet and cold and dense and heavy. So here's what we want to look at. So Ayurveda treats things by applying the opposite. So if you're already unctuous, cold, and smooth, if you've got those qualities in excess in your body, you're not going to go eat a mango, which is also unctuous, cool, and smooth, because that's just going to increase those qualities in your body. And this is generally like in India, they'll do that if you're sick, if you have a cold, they'll say, no mango for you, right? They tell you that immediately. No sugar, no mango. You can have only pungent, right? They'll tell you to eat fiery foods. I apologize for my Indian accent. It's really bad. So we've talked about this a little bit. Kapha is responsible for all the structure in the body, all our cells, our organs, and tissues. It's what lubricates us. So we need kapha. It's actually what we need, the balance. If we're too dry, it's bad. If we're too unctuous, it's bad, right? And you know that from having a cold. When you're all stuffed up with kapha, it's no fun. But when you're super dry, that's not fun either. So you got to find the balance. Primary sites of kapha in the body are the lungs. Kapha prakriti people tend to have respiratory issues from a very young age. They tend to have asthma. They tend to be prone to bronchial infection and lung infections and sinus infections. I see this kind of across the board in all my kapha dosha people. Other sites are plasma, lymph, cerebrospinal fluid, joints, right? We know that one because the synovial fluid in our joints. We need that. And then our sinuses. Kapha people should avoid all the foods they like, sweet, sour, and salty. Ice cream is right out for Kapha folk, although Kapha folk love ice cream, right? Because what's ice cream? It's cold, right? It's dense, static, it's smooth, it's viscous, right? It's all the things that Kapha are. Kapha needs to eat pungent, astringent, and bitter. Does everyone know what astringent foods are? Pomegranate seeds are astringent. Bananas before they're fully ripe are astringent. Asparagus is astringent. It's that feeling that when you bite into something and it feels like your mouth has gone dry, right? Because we want foods that'll dry up the kapha if they're out of balance. Kapha food should be warming, light, freshly cooked. Like a sample meal would be steamed vegetables over light grains like bulgur, or even, it's even better, buckwheat. It's great for kapha. Barley is good for kapha. Brown rice is pretty good for kapha. They need warming spices. Cinnamon is a great spice for kapha, right? They love that. Is anyone? I see people percolating. Are we thinking about kapha? Are you thinking about it in relation to yourself or people you know? People you know. Yeah. Do you have a kapha person in your life? I don't know. Okay. That's okay. All right. How are we doing? Do we feel like we need a little bathroom break or?
So glad you said that.
Yeah. Let's take 5-10 minutes to stretch and continue. I want to leave plenty of room at the end of the session for people to ask questions. Because I know that there will be questions. Because there are always questions. Even if you didn't say anything, Jessica, everyone's always like, we get to the end of the doshas, people are like, oh, but what about? So let's go to Pitta dosha. Pitta dosha. Pittam sasnetam tikshnoshnam. Fun words to say. Pitta is the mixture of, I would say, majority is just fire with a little water. Fire with a little water. So, Pitta sasneha tikshnoshnam lagu visram sarandravam, which is just a line from one of the Ayurvedic books called the Ashtanga Hridayam, and it says Pitta is oily, sharp, hot, light, fleshy smelling, spreading, and liquid. Let's go through those qualities. So it's oily. Pitta already sounds like the most fun, doesn't it? Right? It's oily and it's fleshy smelling. What in God's name does that mean? So oily is just what it sounds like, right? Pitta Prakriti people, that's a tongue twister, tend to have more oily skin, right? They tend to have a little more sheen to them. They tend to have softer hair and skin. But out of balance, it can be greasy. And I think teenagers, right? Teenagers, so babies go from their kaphic state, being little snot factories, to going to their teenage state, being little oil dumps, right? It's like, oh, I remember as a teenager, I was very oily. But it can also show up as a greasy personality. Like, have you ever, used car salesman? You ever met someone and you wanted to go take a shower immediately afterwards because they were just greasy? That's Pitta out of control. That's that oily quality out of control and showing up in their personality. Pitta is also sharp as opposed to dull. And that's pretty easy to figure out because Pitta is fire. Fire is sharp, right? That's why we went over the elemental qualities so you can kind of better grasp these ones. So Pittas tend to have a keen intelligence and memory. Not as good a memory as Kapha, but up there, right? And the thing about Pittas is if they don't remember and they're afraid of embarrassing themselves, they'll fake it until they either figure it out, A, or convince you, B. One of Pitta's hardest things to learn is to say, I don't know. I don't know, right? Which has been my hugest learning in life. They have a quick wit, sharp teeth, good absorption and digestion. Out of balance, it can show up as a sharp tongue and cutting remarks. Has anyone ever had that problem? You ever say something and immediately go, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Or said something and been like, damn straight. I find this to be most true. I get my most pitta in Boston traffic, where I will yell things in my closed car. And that has also been a big learning for me, is learning not to get so caught up in the fact that people can't figure out a rotary. Right? Easy thing, go around in a circle, but no, nobody gets it. Right? That's pitta coming out of you. Even if you don't have a lot of pitta in your prakriti, if that's what's happening, especially in the summer, like this summer when it was so hot, wasn't it true that people were getting more and more irritable, agitated, aggravated, frustrated? That's all pitta out of balance, right? That's all that sharp quality going crazy. Pitta's also hot. Pittas tend to have more heat. They're the ones that go outside in the winter with just a sweater on, right? They're the ones that are red in the face because the heat's rising. They're the ones that tend to be a little hot-headed, which goes back to the sharpness. They kind of go hand in hand. They might even show up with a higher body temperature, but that also means they generally have good digestion, because that agni in the belly, that fire in the belly, tends to be of good quality, right? Whereas kaphas might be slow because their fire is a little damped down with mud, right? There's that slow metabolism. Pitta out of balance, that heat shows up as heartburn, hot flashes outside of menopause, which if you're pitta prakriti, you've probably experienced, where you just all of a sudden get really hot for no reason. It's very odd. We talked about hot-headedness. Light. So kaphas are heavy. Pittas are light-ish. They're not as light as vata. They're light-ish. The light here is more about, they tend to have lighter skin, lighter hair, lighter eyes, and they tend to be light sensitive, either easily burn due to the sun or light sensitive in the eyes. Like, I'm very light sensitive in the eyes, and I generally wear tinted glasses most of the time when I'm not teaching, right? And even teaching, like, it was borderline here. But I think we all have people in our lives that are pretty light sensitive, and that's the pitta dosha, that's sensitivity. Fleshy smelling. What does that mean? So out of balance, and I'll bring you back to your teenage kids, right? They don't smell good generally. Their feet especially don't usually smell. Like, I think teenage boys, like, their feet are just, what is going on there? That's pitta. That's the fleshy smelling out of control. However, on the flip side of that, pitta's fleshy smelling in balance, pittas tend to smell good. Like, they're very usually attracted to the opposite sex because they have that natural musk odor, that those pheromones that the opposite sex, or even same sex, I'm not sure how pheromones work in that instance, but they tend to be more attractive. They tend to smell better. Like, my pitta friends, they always smell good. And they're often wearing perfume. Pittas love perfume, by the way. They love to wear different scents. But it's also like their normal base scent is good, unless they're out of whack. Like, if you're a pitta dosha person and you're getting out of whack, you can probably tell by the way you smell, right? Like, I have one armpit that if I'm getting sick or I'm out of balance, my right armpit smells funky to me. And that's how I know. It's one of the ways I can tell, like, I'm probably out of balance and I need to do something to pull myself back around. But even if you don't have a lot of pitta in your prakriti, you'll probably have some smell cue that tunes you into either that you're not feeling so great, or, maybe you need to take a shower. That's generally it. But, just be aware of that. Pittas also tend to be a lot more sensitive to smell if their pitta's out of whack. Vata does that too, but pitta is where it starts. Spreading. Let's move on to spreading. So pittas tend to spread out. I don't know why. No. Because fire and water spread, right? If fire has fuel, it'll keep going. If water has space, it'll fill it, right? So both those elements have spreading tendencies to them. Usually this shows up in the body if you get a rash and it spreads. Who was telling me about heat rash? You were. And it doesn't just stay located, it goes all over until you tame it.
And it always happens in August.
In August. So that's, we need to work on your pitta.
My pitta.
Your pitta
Too-
needs some
too
help.
much heat.
Yep, too much heat. So she had heat literally coming out of her skin in August, which is the end of pitta season and when pitta is accumulated to its highest point, right? And it spread around. And when you get rashes and when you look at, kids when they get acne, that's the spreading of acne that happens in teenagers. That's the spreading quality. So how does that work out of the physical element? Well, pitta people tend to like to spread their name, especially if they're a little out of balance. Like, I think Obama's probably a very pitta individual, and he spread his name. Politicians kind of have to be, right, to spread their name. I hate to bring politics into it, Donald Trump is the epitome of pitta and kapha gone awry, right? Like, he's literally red. He's red all the time. That's pitta. And Hillary's also pitta out of control. She's got, what is she? It said that she keeps jalapeno peppers in her purse or something to eat, and the hot sauce in her purse to put on food. Like, she is the last person that needs to be eating spicy food. As an Ayurvedist, I would like to sit down with her and say, you need to eat cooling food, woman. You're going to burn in a poof. All right. Liquid. Pitta is also liquid because it's got water in it. And so pittas can have kind of softer, delicate muscles, softer stools. When pitta's out of balance, diarrhea is what happens. Right? And if you've had too much pitta-inducing food, like what happens if you eat maybe not you because you tend to eat spicy food? No. I'm thinking about your chocolate and cheese, which is both pitta foods. And I'm like, you were fine after that. If I ate that, I'd probably be like, the next morning, me in the toilet would be good friends. But pitta, when you eat too many pitta foods, you get pitta tummy. Like, you get nauseous or you get diarrhea, and that's what happens. In the hot season, when it was really, really hot, sometimes people, if they've got too much fire, the heat alone, the external heat will bring it on. When you've got a lot of stress, this happens to me too. Sometimes when I've got way too much pitta stress, too much going on, I'll also get a little loose motion, and that's that liquid quality out of whack. Pitta people, when in balance, are usually leaders, teachers. They're the ones that are in charge. They tend to just automatically be in charge. People also tend to assume they're in charge even when they're not. I don't know how many times I've been in a store and people come up and ask me where things are or what to do in certain situations. It's if you're a pitta person, you have probably been assumed in charge without you meaning to be. Right? I've gone to yoga studios where I'm taking a class and people will come up to me and ask me when the class starts and what I'm teaching today. And I'm like, I actually don't work here. And it'll be in a studio where there are no students that know me too. So I'm always like, no. Pittas have the ability to be very wise and very driven. Some of them are blessed with so much intelligence, in fact, that they can go bald from the pitta burning off their hair. Pitta men tend to go bald because their brains are just working so hard. Right? They need some of that kapha to come in and grow that beautiful, luxurious hair. On the flip side, pittas can be very stubborn and sometimes give wrong answers with great confidence. This is why pittas need to learn how to say, I don't know. Okay. Out of balance, they also tend towards anger, judgment, criticism, and can be perfectionists. Pittas are my people that tend to be like, they're so caught up in being perfectionists that sometimes they won't do anything, right? Because if it's not going to be perfect, they're not going to do it at all. And then they go into that cycle of criticism. And then there's the anger and the judgment, right? And that's pitta burning itself into a tizzy, right? I've seen it, I've done it, I've been there. Pitta time of day is between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And then again at 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Both of these time periods are extremely important, probably the most important time periods of your day, I think personally, and it's not just because I'm mostly Pitta Prakriti. So between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., your digestive level is at its highest, right? This first one is when you should be eating lunch. Lunch should be the biggest meal of your day because this is when you're going to be able to digest it. Make sense? Maybe, maybe not? Okay. This is also tends to be when you can get the most shit done, especially if you're able to harness your dosha clock a little bit, right? Harness that circadian rhythm. But definitely, if you can at all else, if you take nothing away from our series these next 4 weeks, it's that your biggest meal should be lunch, and it should be eaten between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Do not skip lunch. If you're going to skip a meal, skip dinner. Dinner is a throwaway meal. You don't need to eat dinner. It's too late in the day to be eating anyway. Because what time of day do most people eat dinner in? What did we just learn? Kapha, right? Do you think your digestion's quick moving in the kapha time of day? Probably not, right? It's slow, it's steady, it's stable. You're not going to digest. So most of my people that come to me that want to lose weight, I say, stop eating dinner. Just stop. Have some soup. Have a cup of soup. It's okay. Just don't eat your huge meal. However, in our society, what do? That's when we're slapping down. What do you have for lunch? You have a salad, right? A sensible shake, what is it? A shake for breakfast, a shake for lunch, and a sensible dinner, which is usually what? Meat, potatoes, heavy foods, kapha time of day, heavy foods, probably not going to work out so well in the end. Largest meal, eat it then. But what about the second digestive time between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.? What do you think we're digesting then? It shouldn't be food. The day. Yeah. It's also when our pancreas and our gallbladder and all those internal cleansers of the body start to work, right? That's when we can burn off all those toxins and other toxic things that we've taken in, say our experiences throughout the day, right? Does anyone go to bed later than, say, 11? No? 2 people sometimes. So when you go to bed after this pitta time starts, it's basically like being in your house when the house cleaner shows up, and she shows up and sees you in the house still, and she's like, oh, I'll come back later, right? Because you're in her way. So if you stay awake during this time of night, your body doesn't get to do those deep metabolic cleaning processes that it needs to do. It can't process a lot of the fat stores that it might need to process. It can't process a lot of the insulin processing happens then. The bile cleaning happens then. There's a whole list of body processes that need to occur then. But if you're awake then, it can't do that. Especially like if you stay up till this late, oftentimes this will be when you get your second wind and all of a sudden you can take over the world and solve the problems and everything's going to be great. But then you're shortchanging yourself. This is also when I see people, they want that midnight snack, right? This is when they get hungry again because pitta's up again. It makes sense. But if you're asleep in that time, then you're good to go. Pitta time of year, pretty easy, right? Summer. When's the sun at its best? Sorry, I don't like summer so much. Then it's worse. Summer's the worst. No, it's not. It's fine. It's fine. Pitta's time of life, puberty until about 60, 70 or so. It's changing now, and it's different for everybody when you go from pitta to vata, but it's pretty easy to watch when your kids go from kapha to pitta, right? You can watch the two levels start to shift. They get a little more mouthy, they get a little more domineering, they get a little more pimples, they get a little more oily, they start to smell not so good, their voice deepens, they grow hair in funny places. That's what happens. All right. Pitta governs all digestion in the body. Everything that enters the body must be cooked. So here we go. Everything in the body has to be cooked. Everything that comes in through your sense organs, your yan indriyas, those different 5 organs that we talked about, has to be cooked in some way. It has to be metabolized, has to be processed. Does that make sense? Yeah, I see some slow nods going on. So food's obvious and easy, right? But what about everything you see in a day? What about everything you see? That has to be processed, right? Everything you touch. How else do I know I'm holding a pen or that I'm sitting on a floor? My brain had to, behind the scenes, cook that information and give me an answer. What about when you're smelling something? Same thing. Hearing something? Same thing. Now here's something that will really twist your noodle. Every single thing you take in through any of your sense organs becomes you. You are a product of absolutely everything you take in through your mouth, through your nose, through your eyes, through your skin, through your ears. So it behooves you to be very selective about what you're taking in. Anyone watch the news? Yeah? Does anyone watch the horror movies or violence well, if you watch the news, you watch violence, so that's a given. Does anyone listen to NPR or the news on the radio? Uh-huh. Anybody read and take in information from the internet that's news? Or I'm escaping on news because it's an easy one and because it's probably one of the most destructive forces in your life. Have you ever walked away from a news program or a radio program about the news and felt like, wow, that was amazing. I feel so uplifted and good right now. Like my quality life has improved by listening to that broadcast. Generally speaking, unless it was some kind of op-ed fluff piece, no, right? You did not feel good after hearing about the 5 people got shot in Chelsea or whatever. It's like every newscast I've ever seen is like the end of Hamlet. He dies, she dies, everybody dies. Right? Or this blew up, that blew up. The other thing that you need to think about is that any news source that you're listening to, reading, or hearing, watching, intaking, is biased in some way to make money off of something. They're not there to actually disseminate information in a proper form because they don't really care about you or what you're hearing. They do not, I repeat, do not have your best interests in mind no matter what they're telling you. Right? And that can be a hard one to sit with because it's a long history where the news was, Tom Brokaw came and sat in your living room and told you everything you needed to know, right? Walter Cronkite would sit down with you and tell you all the world's events and everything was going to be okay even though the shit's hitting the fan. What we need to do as a species, I think, is to start to separate ourselves from those sources and start to be very particular about what we take in. Because as we're seeing generationally, what's happening is that we're going from this kind of sattvic state of being to a more rajasic state of being. So we're going from kind of a peaceful human to a much more violent and confused and tumultuous human. So it's up to us to kind of start to really notice, all right, there's this newspaper, there's an article about Donald Trump. Does it serve me to read that? Am I going to benefit my internal environment by taking in that information? And then making the choice, making the conscious choice. Yes, actually, I want to read that. Or no, actually, I can do without that. And that's for everything. Food, drink, clothing. You need to just start being aware. And what I'm going to say is also true is that I'm just giving you information. I'm not going to tell you that anything is good or bad, okay? Despite what I just said about the news. I've got a thing about the news. That's been my bee in my bonnet for a couple of years, so that's something I'm working through. But anything I tell you, it's not that chocolate and cheese is bad. It's not that kitchery is good. All I can do is give you the information, and then you get to make the choice. You get to make the choice of whether or not it's good for you. Because you can take in anything you want as long as you can digest it. So it may be that you watch the news and it actually works for you and that you can digest it and it's okay. Whereas, I don't know about you, but I can't. I take that in and it immediately gets me going and I feel like shit and then I just don't want to do anything else for the rest of the day. But that's me, right? So for me, the news doesn't work. For you, it might. Chocolate and cheese might work for you. And I know for a fact you digested it well because you were so happy about it. So I knew that that worked for you. All right. Ooh, let's take a deep breath. Okay. All right. Pitta's primary sites in the body: small intestine, stomach, eyes, liver, brain, skin. Pitta people need to avoid everything they usually want to eat, right? My Pitta folk usually love pungent, sour, and salty, right? Szechuan food, bring it on. It's one of my favorites. Most Pitta people. And then they need to favor sweet, naturally sweet. Not sugar, but like sweet potatoes or carrots or basmati rice is naturally sweet. Yeah, it's considered sweet on the tongue. It's not bitter, right? It's usually sweet. If you ever just sit down and eat a bowl of, or just one bite of fresh cooked white rice, you'll notice that it's got kind of a sweet taste to it. Maybe not after the chocolate cheese. Um, they need to also favor bitter and astringent ones because these can help to balance out the liquid qualities that Pitta tends to have. Pittas really need to avoid processed food, acidic food, especially tomatoes, unless they're the sweet, ripe tomatoes from the vine. But even those should be only eaten in moderation because they're acidic. Pitta's acid, right? Fire and water. What's fire water? It's acid for the most part, right? Naturally cooling foods like cucumber, cilantro, steamed summer squash is really good. Anything coconutty is good for pittas. And we'll go more into food next week. We'll cover more of what's appropriate for different doshas, but just to get the idea and start percolating it is good. Okay. Last and certainly not least is Vata dosha, and this is our probably the reason why it's last is one, it happens after everything else, but two, because it's really the most important. Oh, Pitta. Hopefully by now you're starting to recognize how you have at least these two doshas in you, yeah? At different times, too, right? At different times, I'm sure you felt the Pitta fire or the Kapha chill, right? Now we've got the Vata wind. Vata means that which moves. It's ether and air. Air is the only element that moves. Pitta and Kapha are lame. Pitta and Kapha cannot move on their own. Pitta and Kapha need Vata. Tatra ruksho lagushita kara sukshmash choloni laha. That basically says that Vata is dry, light, cool, rough, mobile, and subtle. Let's start with dry. Vata Prakriti people tend to have drier hair, drier skin. They tend to have drier senses of humor. Annie Hoffman, what? Annie's very dry. Our teacher, Annie Hoffman, is very dry, and she makes these jokes that just kind of sit there, and we're all like, was that a joke? So dry. No one knows whether it was a joke or not. Or she's just being funny accidentally, which happens. They can be dry emotionally, right? I've seen Vata people that are just kind of like, dry. And it can show up in the body as constipation, whereas Pittas tend to be diarrhea, Vatas tend to be kind of constipated. They're dry in the colon. This light here, so next is light, this is the opposite of heavy. So Vata people tend to be very light in body. They tend to have a good inversion practice if they practice inversions. They fly up into upside down poses without a care in the world, making the Pitta and Kapha people feel heavy. They tend to have a tendency towards being thin, underweight, other light qualities, insomnia, spacey, ungroundedness, right? Vatas are the ones that are flitting through the room. It's hard to get them to sit down for any amount of time, especially if the Vata is high. They tend to be spacey all over the place. Like they put their keys down and then they go over here 10 seconds later, where are my keys? Even though we all saw them put their keys down, we know where their keys were, they lost it. The quality can also manifest when Vata is out of balance as feelings of anxiety, worry, and fear, right? This kind of sounds like our society in a lot of ways, doesn't it? We tend to live in a Vata society. This is what, Vata and Pitta are more prevalent than Kapha, and now that you know a little bit more about both of them, you can see that, I hope. Coolness here, it's really, I'm going to write cold, because it's really cold more than coolness. Kapha's more cool. Vata's really cold. If you think about air and ether, think about space. Space is very cold, right? When you're out like in the atmosphere, it's not warm unless there's fire involved. And here, Vatas tend to have cold hands and feet. They're the ones that it can be really warm in the room and they want a sweater, unless luckily they have some pitta in them, which keeps that core hot, but the extremities will still be cold. Like my core is always hot, but my fingers and toes are always cold. Vata also tends to have a little more sensitivity in the shift of temperature. So when things swing to one end or the other, they notice faster than you might. Rough is the opposite of smooth and can manifest as rough hair, rough nails, having a rough time in life. I think it's related to Vata's kind of spacey, unstable nature when they're out of balance, that makes life a little more rough because they're always kind of trying to catch up with their challenges, right? Not that Vata is bad. Vata is fantastic. We need Vata desperately to be able to do anything, right? Like we talked about Rajas being necessary to move. Vata is also necessary to move. Mobile. So your Vata in your body is why you can multitask, even though we all know you can't actually multitask, right? You can only do one thing really quickly in succession with other things. But the mobility here allows them to be able to kind of go from one thing to another and be able to actually drop in on each thing, where it might take a kapha person like, hold on, let me catch up with you and see what you're talking about. Whereas a Vata's like, nope, got this, got this, got this, got this. They work really well. They're great waiters because they can flit around and do everything. They're also really good creative souls. Vata is what makes people creative. It's that subtle quality, which is the next one, leading right into subtle. Right? So subtle quality is the creativity, active fantasy life. They tend to be able to grasp energy concepts much better than, say, a pitta or a kapha person. They tend to be able to really get into the esoteric because they're already there. They're already in the ether, right? So that's going to be familiar and easy for them. Vata people in balance tend to be creative and flexible. They have lean bodies. They are very imaginative. Out of balance, they're fearful. They have anxiety, gas, bloating. There's your wind, right, Meryl? We were talking about that. And they tend to have insomnia. Vata time of day. Okay. 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. and 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Anyone have any insomniacs?
Just like through that time?
Yeah, Vata's at its highest at 2 a.m. through 6 a.m. and at its highest at 2 p.m. through 6 p.m. So Vata type of insomnia has you waking up around 2, 3 a.m. and the mind is worrying. And there's a lot happening in the brain and it's a little like, wow, what's going on? And it's very hard to come back down. And generally, if you do come back down, you can get back to sleep somewhere around 6, and then you sleep really heavy because it's kapha, and then you wake up feeling groggy and confused, right? In the afternoon, it's when most people feel like they want to take a nap, especially if they've had insomnia on the other hand, on the other swing of it, right? If they were up at night, this is where they're going to want to fall asleep. This is also where people want sugar. Right? This is where most people want sugar really badly. That's when the sugar cravings hit, because Vata's at its highest, and it's like this airy, ethery energy that wants more airy, ethery stuff. So if you're not taking a nap, you take sugar, and often what happens is you take a nap and then you want sugar.
What do you balance it with? Because I don't eat sugar, but I've been looking to balance that 2 to 6 period, because I don't usually get home and have dinner until 6, and it's not a big meal, but I can feel like I need that.
Right, you eat more at lunch.
I eat a good sandwich, yeah.
Yeah, you got to eat more at lunch. You got to eat more. So the idea is to eat enough at lunch that you're satisfied until dinner. And snacking is kind of an easy way to dump fuel in the body, but you're robbing your body's ability to process its fat stores, right? So what do you balance it with? If you had to, you could have a piece of fruit.
Fruit, yeah.
Ayurveda doesn't really consider fruit as a food, so to speak. Because it doesn't digest like anything else. It's very light and easy to digest, so it kind of goes through the system and gets into the tissues much quicker than say, like a burger would or a cheese would. Yeah, so I think eating more at lunch and then having fruit if you really needed it. And then, you know, fat is good for you, and I know you don't digest fat, so avocados, can you have avocados?
Yeah, well, I have to cut back.
Cut back.
What normal people can eat.
Right. So I was going to say, because fat would be good to kind of keep you going, but fruit's definitely a good idea for that.
So like maybe an avocado fruit combination.
You can't combine avocado with, or fruit with other foods, because avocado is going to digest at a much slower rate than the fruit will. But you could definitely have, like, an apple would be good for you, especially a cooked apple. If you cook them ahead of time and kind of take them with you to have that snack. Apples and dates cooked together would be good for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, it's a good combination. Vata's at the end of everything, so Vata time of year, you're soaking in it. It's right now. It's the fall. Yeah, it's my favorite time of year. So fall through early winter. So up until things start to thaw, and it's not like there's a switch flipped on a certain day during a month and that's all of a sudden a different doshic time of year. The same is true in the day. It's not like, oh, it's 2 a.m., that must be Vata. It's a slow, gradual thing. So think of it this way. So as Vata is rising and lowering, Pitta has just done the same, but they cross over. Does that make sense? Yeah, so, and Kapha on the other end, right, is doing the same. Whoop. So that rise and fall happens every day, happens every year, right? And where those rise and falls happen can shift. And I think we're seeing that now due to climate change. We're seeing the pattern shift a little bit. We just had 90 degree, like 89 degree day or whatever it was, really hot. And now we're finally getting into the meat of fall. So this is when Vata's at its highest, and Vata being the most pesky of the doshas, we need to treat it the most. We need to be absolutely in tune with it because it's the one that can screw everything else up pretty royally. It's interesting to note that they attribute 80 diseases to Vata in the old texts. 80 diseases come from Vata, 40 come from Pitta, and only 20 come from Kapha. Right, so Vata is really the one to watch if you can. All right, Vata governs. Vata time of life. What's Vata time of life? When do you start to dry out and husk out?
60.
It's after menopause for women. Right? It's after menopause, you're in the Vata time of life because you're drying out. The tissues are drying out, the bones are drying out, everything's getting a little rough, right? However, it doesn't have to be that way. If you manage Vata well throughout your life, then when you get to menopause, it's not so bad. Just because symptoms are common doesn't mean they're normal, right? Those things like hot flashes and stuff, they don't need to be normal. Vata governs movement. We talked about that. Primary sites, anywhere there's space, mostly the colon, the brain, the diaphragm, the throat, the pelvic cavity, the heart. Right? Thigh bones are another major place for Vata. That's why often at the end of class I'll have you put a bolster over your low belly and your thighs. Vata balancing diet has to be warm, cooked, oily if you can digest it. And they should avoid things that are raw, cold, dry, or hard, which is challenging because most Vata people I know want to eat salads all the time because it's familiar. It's light, cold, and dry, just like Vata. They don't need to eat them though.
So you'll talk more about like what you say it should avoid raw, cold, dry, and should do warm, cooked, and oily. You'll talk more about that in future weeks. Like what does that really mean?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Well, we can talk about it now. Let's talk about that one now, because I think this is the most important dosha to be worried about right now for most of us, is this Vata dosha. So, warm, cooked, and oily. With Ayurveda, it's pretty safe to say that all you need to do is go to the farmer's market at any time and see what they have there. For the most part, that'll be what you ought to be eating. So this time of year, sweet potatoes, root vegetables, squashes, anything that's coming up right now, anything that's long, takes a long time to cook, slow cook, right? Heavy grains are better this time of year if you can tolerate it. Wheat is harvested this time of year. We don't think about it, but if you tolerate wheat, it's a good time to reintroduce that into your diet. Bulgur is good. Oatmeal is fantastic for this time of year, so that's a heavy but easy to digest food. Just because it's heavy in nature doesn't mean it's hard to digest. However, if you do eat meat and cheese, this is not a bad time to introduce them, especially if they're healthy meats and cheeses that are from sources that you recognize. Incidentally, if you're going to eat dairy, make sure it's organic. Please don't eat anything but organic dairy. If you can't get organic, don't eat it because it's at the bottom of the food chain, right? That means that whatever toxins, pesticides that have been in the environment have been processed through that animal and then processed into that dairy, right? So any of your food that is low on the food chain needs to be eaten organic or at least ethically sourced so that you know where it came from. You should pretty much try to eat as organic as possible, although I know for cost purposes that's not always possible. Check in with your local Dirty Dozen list and Clean 15 lists and just see what they are right now. I have one somewhere, but I didn't think to bring it. I apologize for that. Soups are good this time of year. Stews are good this time of year. If you want more information, a really good resource is the Everyday Ayurveda Cookbook by my friend Kate O'Donnell. That is probably in the future going to become a required text for these courses, just because it's really going to be useful. We sell it here, but you can also get it on Amazon. It's the Everyday Ayurveda Cookbook by Kate O'Donnell. She's a local Boston girl. We went to school together, and she really breaks it down. She's got a section, each section in the book, she's got an everyday section for all year long, and then she's got the 4 seasons in there, so you can really dive deep and kind of see what kind of foods to be eating. But I will bring, next week I'll bring food lists for the season, so you can kind of get an idea of what is to eat. Let me write that down because I remember. And it becomes instinctual after a while what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. But it takes time because we have our cravings that have been built in that we're like, oh, I'm feeling really heavy, I'm going to go eat a salad, whereas really you should maybe be eating some steamed greens and some basmati rice or a little bit of tofu or something like that. So what do you think then, Meryl, because you asked, would be a meal that would be good this time of year? Off the top of your head,
Like
something.
some soup or something.
Some
yeah.
soup, yeah. Something that's long, slow cooked. Like I made a crock pot of chicken soup the other day. We do eat meat in our house, and that's even better when it's crock pot cooked because the meat is cooked for a long time with spices, which makes it even more light and easy to digest. However, because of the type of protein it's very grounding. So maybe that's a good way to think of it. You want to eat foods that are light but grounding, because you don't want to eat anything that's too heavy to digest, because then you're not going to process it well and you're going to end up with indigestion, which is the cause of ama. Ama is anything that is undigested in your body. Ama is just a term that means undigested sludge for the most part. And we want to try and avoid that as much as possible, because if you've got ama in your digestive tract, you're not going to process other foods very well. And what happens is your intestinal walls, your intestinal tract, have these little fingers running down the sides. It's called villi, right? And they're what help to move the bolus of food from stomach down through processing down through to the anus. And so as we undigest things, or as we consume things that aren't digested well, these little fingers, these little hairs, they get blocked and they can't move as well, which causes stagnation in the digestive system, which causes a lot of problems, gas, bloating, right? Feeling of fullness, even when you're hungry. That ever happened where you just feel like, oh, I just feel heavy and thick even though I'm hungry? So what we need to do is eat things that are light to digest but grounding in nature, so that that intestinal tract can stay clear. and we can still feel like our both feet are on the ground and that we feel stable. So soups, sweet potatoes are fantastic. Yams are good. Pumpkin is fantastic this year. Get one, bake it. You don't even need to chop it first. You can just shove it in the oven the way it is. Then cut it and scoop it. It'll work just fine. Because I hear that a lot. I like squash, but I can't cut them open. You don't have to cut them open to bake them. You bake them and then cut them open. It's okay. If you don't want to do that trick, you can and if you don't use microwaves, this won't work, but microwave it for, I think it's like 4 minutes. Then you can cut it easier. Then you can scoop it and do the thing. Yeah. Does everyone eat breakfast? Is it a hot breakfast for the most part? This time of year it should be a hot breakfast, so hot cereals. Eggs are okay, but eggs are light to digest, but they can also be light and they can be heating, and for some people they can be acid forming. So just watch, don't eat too many eggs, and try, I know this is going to seem like a sin, don't combine eggs and dairy. But what will I put my cheese on? Eggs and dairy are an incompatible food combination, so eggs and cheese, not so great. Yes?
What, I just bought it's Kite Hill, it's almond.
Oh, the almond milk? That should be fine.
But almond cheese.
Yeah, because it's not actually dairy, it's an almond cheese.
It's a good substitute if you're not eating dairy too. Go with some
Yeah, the
almond
Kite Hill
cheese.
stuff is fantastic.
Yeah.
They're making a good product, and Ayurvedically, I haven't found anything wrong with it, except for that it's fermented. So if you've got high pitta, the fermentation can be a little, but it's not overly fermented. Like it's not like a
No.
sauerkraut level fermentation, but it's just a little fermented.
Just a little bit, yeah.
But that's a good alternative.
Yeah, it's like a creamy cheese too.
Yep, it's good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Dare I ask for questions before we get into Dinacharya? I know there are questions. Take a minute. Take a breath.
I don't understand the, when you're talking about the doshas, do you mean that people kind of fall in one category or another, or people are a combination of them, or?
Good question, Diane. People are always a combination of the three. So you have a unique makeup of ether, air, fire, water, and earth in your body. And the combination of those has turned out to be vata, pitta, kapha, and whatever, kapha, pitta, vata, whatever combination it is. Generally speaking, people are dual doshic. They tend to have two primary doshas. Sometimes people are monodoshic, but it's rare, and even rarer is to have someone that's got all three in fairly even proportions. Most people have the primary dosha, like I'm primarily pitta, my secondary dosha is vata, and I've got very little kapha in me naturally, right? That's been studied over years, even though now I have some suspicion that there might be a little more kapha than I thought.
How do you know?
How do you know? Lots of study. Lots of study. Sitting with a qualified practitioner, such as myself or Kate O'Donnell or someone else, or just really looking at how the elements show up in your body. But what can get confusing, and I think where your confusion might be coming from, is that because we're more than one, it gets blurry, and it can feel blurry, right? It can be like, oh, but I resonate with all of those things. The best thing to do, and what I recommend, is to find out where you're out of balance first. Like, what is showing up? What symptoms are showing up? Do you suffer from insomnia? Do you suffer from gas and bloating? Do you feel stuck in your life? Are you emotionally possessive? Do you have a tendency to fly off the handle? Are you aggravated? Where are your imbalances showing up? And then work on combating that, treating with the opposite, right? So if you're feeling spacey, airy, treat it with grounding, oil, stuff like that. If you're feeling fiery, cool yourself down. If you're feeling stuck, lighten yourself up. Then once those imbalances start to shift, you can start to see what your true nature is. And that can also be helpful to look back to what your nature was as a child, right? What were you like when you were a little kid? Were you a good sleeper? Were you someone who was always like coming up with the imaginary game? Were you this? Were you that? Once you start to see those things, then you can say, oh, hey, yeah, when I'm in balance, my prakriti tends towards more kapha, more pitta, right? And once you know that, then the balance starts to come in a little easier, because you could say, oh, I would really like to eat that rice cake with popcorn on top of it, but I know that's going to throw my, I know it's not a good snack, but that's going to throw my, I was trying to think of the most vata provoking thing I could, but that's going to throw my vata out of balance, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to eat this half a baked sweet potato, which I know is grounding, and I'll put a little maple syrup on it so it's a little extra sweet, and maybe throw some ghee on it, because I know ghee is going to help to ground me even more, right? Or, wow, I'm feeling really fiery and overworked. I'm going to look at my schedule and see what I can let go of this week in order to give myself some more space and time to chill out, right? Conversely, I haven't been off the couch in 3 days. Maybe I need to go for a walk, right? Does that help? No?
Yeah,
Kind of. Yeah, it's I'm not going to say it's easy, but I will say that it's study. Your self-study is the most important part. You have to just keep focusing on you.
So, because I found that I kind of fell into one category, but some of the things were things that I feel like have shifted, or maybe that I've shifted.
Well, because life happens.
Yeah.
And you happen. And if you can, people, when they find out that I don't really have any kapha in my prakriti, they're a little surprised, because I tend to be very stable and steady. I've got a lower voice. I tend to be a calming influence for the most part when I'm teaching, usually not, not if you see me on the street. But that's learned, right? That's all been learned over the years. I've learned how to be calm and steady and stable, because I needed to cultivate that within myself for what I do for a living.
So that what you see as characteristics, like say what you recognize in yourself as what your childhood, or what you recognize as your personality, probably in general, that you feel has shifted, is just stuff that you've learned.
It's
how to
most likely
balance.
you've learned how to balance it, or, I mean, if there was stuff when you were a kid that were out of balance, like tendencies you had that weren't healthy or weren't a balanced presentation of that dosha, chances are you've learned to fix it in yourself, to balance it in yourself.
Yeah.
When I think back to how people are when they're children, I'm thinking back to like, what were you when you were balanced at your healthiest, right? What were you when you were at your perfect self? And that's where you come from. Not like, oh, when I was little, I never slept at all and couldn't keep me still. Like, that's not a balanced child.
So it's possible that you'll recognize something, that you might be a more balanced person at a later point in your life than an early.
Absolutely. I've seen lots of Vata kids that are like bouncing off the walls and really out of control. And
Yeah, because that's what I'm seeing. I'm recognizing myself more in the Vata, but I've resolved some of the stuff. But it's like, oh yeah, there it is. But like the anxiety stuff, the stuff I've learned to deal with, and insomnia. I take pills for that.
yeah.
But it feels like very hard in one area.
Yep. Yep. And everyone's going to have a different presentation.
Kind of mix up all it. Yeah, it's really.
It's a puzzle. You're a puzzle.
It is. Well,
You're
yeah.
a unique puzzle, all by yourself.
Unique little flower.
Yeah. There's nobody else like you, like any of you. Go for it, Jessica. I can see it.
Formulating.
How to phrase it.
So, for the most part, like any of I feel like a lot of it is, if you were in balance, you wouldn't know what your predominant was, because anything, it almost feels like the way you find out is by things being out of balance. So like a lot of the out of balance things, in all three, I can recognize them in myself, but I can also tie them all to certain periods of my life, like with high anxiety or,
Mhm.
do you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
where, and it's a way something has never presented before for me, but as soon as that situation resolved, like, it's not an issue, it was never an issue before, and I don't anticipate it would be.
Right.
So, but I don't think I identify with any of the three of them more than the other. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just, I can't, looking at what, trying to identify it, I just feel like it's all on the side of what's out of whack.
Right.
And for me, when I look at like what's out of whack, I feel like it's tied to situations.
Well, because it depends.
Right. So,
Right.
but the situations are outside of me. Right. I'm not saying they don't help shape me and my.
But it's how you
thinking.
react to them that is what's in balance or out of balance. Because you believe, whether you think about it consciously or not, you're choosing your reactions.
Right.
Your reactions. So once you start, so that can be shifted. It's up to you to do it, but it can be shifted, and that's where the self-study comes in. That's where the deep looking at yourself with the microscope in every situation starts to happen. Right? The mindfulness you learn on the mat is the same mindfulness you take out in the Ayurveda class, because you have to be able to like see like, wow, that really just made me want to punch him. But do I need to feel like that? No, if I cultivate the awareness like, okay, that reaction maybe not have helpful. That sounds like my pitta's a little high. What can I do to combat that? Look at my reaction and keep myself cool next time that guy comes along. Does that make sense? So, always the answer in Ayurveda is it depends. Because it's going to depend. All your reactions depend. What time of day is it? How are you feeling? Have you eaten? Is this right? Is that right? Did that person just cut you off? Like, all these things come into play. But what I will say is that once you're in balance, you've done the self-study, you've done the work, then you become less reactionary because you're seated in the self, right? Swastha. You're less drawn out of yourself to these reactions. Once you figure all that out, the balance comes, and it could take a lifetime. You may not get it in this lifetime. Might be next lifetime. I don't know. But it takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of self-study. And that's probably not the answer you wanted. But, I mean, that's what it is. And it will happen like that. You'll be like, oh, but I resonate with that. And I can see how that works too. And oh, I can get that sometimes too. Because you have all three in you. Right? And slowly you start to pick it away. And you start to recognize, once you got to look with the lens of Ayurveda, first off. And once you start to do that, then things start to become clearer and they make more sense. I promise. It'll be very confusing, and then it'll start to clear up, and you'll be like, oh, I get it. And you'll call me up at 3 a.m. Be like, I totally just had a Vata moment. Be like, I know. It's okay. Don't call me at 3 a.m. I did it. I figured it out. It'll be great. And I'll be like, it's Vata time. Don't wake me up. Questions? Your brain's cooked?
No, I mean, the question is sort of, I think I want to jump ahead to the next few weeks. So, can food really help with anxiety and insomnia? And all
Oh,
those
yeah.
things? Right.
Food, but it's not just food.
Mhm.
So we look at vihara and ahara. Vihara is lifestyle, and ahara is food. So you can eat the best sweet potato in the world cooked by yogis chanting beautiful songs over it, but if your lifestyle is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, then you're not going to do well. So it's up to you, and that goes back to what I was saying about how you digest things. Experiences are things that you have to digest. So if you wake up in the morning and this instant your alarm goes off, you're running like a chicken with their head cut off, you're setting yourself up for disaster. Of course you're not going to sleep. Your vata's too high, you know. If you, however, get one of those wake up apps that plays beautiful music and slowly increasing volumes, and then, oh, I'm awake and it's 5 a.m. and I've got this span of time in front of me. I'm going to go make my hot water with lemon and honey, and then I'm going to take my shower, and then I'm going to abhyanga. I'm going to massage with oil, right? And then I'm going to sit and drink my lemon water, and then I'm going to get in the shower and just rinse off the oil and pat myself down and scent myself with beautiful clothes, which takes us to the dinacharya, the daily routine, right? I'm already kind of talking about that. I've given you a daily routine, and this is an example of a daily routine. This may or may not work for you, and what I would say is take what you can from it and leave the rest for now. It's called Dinacharya, right? Daily routine. Dinacharya, routine. It's what is really necessary to start to bring yourself into better balance. So if you've got a solid Dinacharya practice where you're waking up, going to bed at the same times every day, eating at roughly the same times every day, and doing things to nurture and nourish yourself, you're going to have a much better time making it through the day. Waking up early in the morning. So he gives some basic times when people should wake up. So kaphas, you don't need much sleep. So you could get up by 4:30 and it would be good. Vatas need the most sleep, so they can usually sleep until 6 a.m. Pitta wakes up somewhere in the middle. 5:30 is good. And then he says to look at your hands and move them over your body to clean your aura. Say a prayer before leaving bed. My teacher Claudia used to say, fall in love before you got out of bed. Fall in love. Cultivate the sensation of falling in love. It can be helpful. Even if you don't have a love specifically, you still know what it feels like, and you can kind of instill that in your body. Cleaning your face, mouth, and eyes, right? A lot of this stuff you do anyway. Drink water in the morning. I usually say drink hot lemon water in the morning, right? Evacuation, go poop. If you don't have a squatty potty, you might look into one. They're incredibly useful. When you sit on a toilet and your feet are on the floor, you're actually pulling on the sigmoid colon. There's a muscle that pulls on the sigmoid colon that makes it harder to poop. If you've got your feet up in a squatting position, that's open, and the poop can just slide right out, which is what we want. I know. We talk a lot about poop in this class. You'll get used to it. Scrape your tongue. Does everyone scrape their tongue now? No? Get a tongue scraper. They're
What is
cheap.
that?
Tongue scraper is a piece of metal. It's a U shape. It has little handles, and you pull it down on your tongue. If you don't scrape your tongue, start tomorrow morning. When you wake, come back next week.
Well, if for scraping your tongue, is brushing it with your toothbrush, isn't that the same thing?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Okay.
And if you don't have a tongue scraper and you'd like to start this practice, the edge of a spoon works really well. I've used it when traveling. But yeah, I got good copper tongue scrapers from Cambridge Naturals. They were like $8 or something. Keep them forever. I have some I think I got from India. I'll see if I can bring in so you can see
You
them.
can get them on Amazon too.
Yeah.
How far back do you scrape your tongue?
As far back as you can without gagging yourself. I mean, you go back to front, like, I don't know, 4 to 6 times. You'll know. Once you try it, you'll know. You can see. You'll bum yourself out at first, but you'll get over it. Yeah, because once you see what's on your tongue when you wake up in the morning, you're going to be like, oh, God, because you've swallowed it most of times. But that's ama on your tongue. That coating you wake up with, that's ama. That's the undigested stuff coming out. You want to get rid of it. You don't want to eat it. This might also be where oil pulling comes in. Don't, especially if you've got vata in your prakriti or feeling vata vitiated, don't swish with oil. Just hold it in your mouth. Hold it in your mouth. And that comes under gargling after cleaning your teeth. But I just want to stress, like, don't be swishing it like crazy because all that movement vitiates vata. And we sure as heck don't want more vata going on in our head. Nasya, oil in the nose, especially if you're prone to allergies, colds. This time of year is a great time to start putting a little oil in the nose. It doesn't need to be a lot, and for you, I'd wait until the congestion is gone. But you can even just stick your finger in your warm sesame oil and put it up your nose. It lubricates the channel. I have a dropper bottle, and I put 2-3 drops in each nostril, and then I tap it down and spread it out, and it can be just so beneficial. Oil in the ears, karana paruna. If you don't have any ear problems, like if you haven't had a punctured tympanic membrane, you can do this. A couple of warm drops of oil in each ear. And then you kind of hang out, you can tap it a little, getting the oil to move down. And then your abhyanga, right? We talked about that.
Oil, when you say sesame oil, the sesame oil that you buy like at Trader Joe's for cooking is
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, well, not the toasted sesame oil, because you'll smell like a wonton wrapper all day. Just plain, regular
That's all
sesame
they
oil.
have.
Go to Whole Foods in the salad dressing section and the oil section, they'll have bottles of
Oh.
regular, plain, non-toasted sesame oil. Coconut oil is also good for Avianga, especially if you tend to run hot. Sunflower oil is another good option if sesame oil proves to be too hot for you. Like, I don't tolerate sesame oil very well on my body. I break out, so I use sunflower oil. It seems to work pretty well. Olive oil in a pinch. It's grounding, it's heating. It'd be fine. And then bathing, right? That's kind of an obvious thing to do. So what I do is and we'll cover Avianga. I think we cover it next session. I'll look at the sheet. You take your regular shower with soap and all that, then oil and sit in your steamy bathroom. And then after it's been like 5-10 minutes, longer if you can, half an hour would be golden, but I don't know if I could get you to sit there that long. Then you take another shower without soap and you just rinse off the excess oil. If you have loved ones that are going to use your shower after you've been in it and you want them to stay alive, please wipe your floor down before you leave your shower, or else you'll kill your loved ones, and that's bad. No killing of loved ones. All right. Dr. Ladd says, wearing clean clothes brings beauty and virtue. So wear something that makes you happy. Why not? Use of perfume. It's great to smell good. Now, pittas don't need to be the only one that's smelling good. Exercise. So exercise comes after bathing because the classics say that the sweat produced when doing yoga has beneficial compounds in it and should be rubbed back into the skin. We don't do Bikram yoga around here, and if you do hot yoga, it's probably different. But the type of yoga we do, if there's any sweat produced, you just rub it back into the skin. For the most part, we're not getting all sweaty, stinky in these classes, unless you're doing the broga. That's a different story. And then we do pranayama, right? Alternate nostril breaths would be great. We'll do some, if you're staying for class tonight, we'll do some Nadi Shodhana in class before we get started. Or actually at the end. Then meditate, and then you eat a yummy breakfast. How many people just looked at that list and goes, I can never, ever do all that in one morning?
That would take me hours.
That's why you get up at 4:30 in the morning.
That's another thing I can't do.
That's why I said take what you can and leave the rest. You fit it in where you can. Some of them, like Abhyanga, I think are instrumental in keeping yourself balanced. But a lot of them are things you probably already do.
So I was just saying, Bianca is probably one of the ones that are most difficult because they take all that time.
But you don't, it doesn't have to take a ton of time. So I sit and I drink my lemon honey water. Then I get in the shower for the second shower. Then I'm done. Right? So it probably tacks on another, on a fast day, probably another 10 minutes. On a slow day, I'll sit in there for a good, like I light a candle and I do, it's a type of meditation where you just gaze into the candle flame. It's strengthening for the eyes, and my brain will not spit out the name of it. I know it's not takra because I'm drinking takra, so it can't be that. Anyway, it starts with a T. And then it changes everything. When I started that practice, it started to shift the vata a lot, and it definitely helped with my insomnia. The thing is, though, you have to be consistent with it, and you have to try it for a while. Some of these practices, when started, take up to 6 months to really take a good effect, especially Abhyanga. Well, although if you've got a lot of vata, if you start Abhyanga, I would think in a month you'd be sleeping better. If not, just a couple weeks. And then before you go to bed, especially if you have insomnia, put a little warm oil on your feet. Massage your feet with warm oil. That usually helps people sleep a little better. Yeah, I've noticed it. Especially if you're consistent with it. Consistency is key. Consistency is key.
So again, like sesame oil?
Sure. Or if you have some like yummy massage oil that you really like. Like I like Annie. I stay at Annie's house sometimes. She has this wonderful almond massage oil that smells like almonds. So you rub it on your feet and you smell like biscotti. It's so good. It's a good one. Questions? That's a lot. You guys got info dumps. Are you feeling okay? It's a lot of information to take in all at once. And there'll be questions that come up, and there'll be confusion, and there'll be weirdness too, maybe. Like, how can that be? And there might be frustration. That's okay. What I should have told you in the very beginning of class is that I can tell you all of this, but I can never untell you any of it. Because once you start going down this rabbit hole and start looking at everything through the lens of Ayurveda, it's hard to stop doing that. So just be aware that eventually you'd be walking down the street and be like, oh wow, that person's kapha is really high. Like, or you be on the bus and be like, wow, the vata on this bus is just too much for me. And your loved ones will probably start wondering why you've all of a sudden started speaking Sanskrit, but that's okay. It's okay.
So, if, like Chinese medicine has moved from Ayurveda, is some of the Chinese traditions sense, like the elements and stuff, is that similar, or is it completely independent?
I don't know that, a lot of Chinese medicine goes right hand in hand with Ayurveda. I have two of my teachers are actually Chinese medical doctors and Ayurvedic doctors because they're able to go kind of hand in hand. I don't know what the correlation between the elements are, but I think there is one. It comes up mostly like when we talk about pulse that I've noticed. So when we read someone's pulse, you can say in Chinese medicine, they'll say someone's pulse is watery or it's fiery or something, and that kind of directly corresponds to what I would feel in a pulse saying, oh, the kapha is high, pitta is high, vata is high, right? And then I've noticed that my Ayurvedic and Chinese doctor friends really tend to use the two synergistically. They work really well together, and so there must be a lot of correlations. I don't know them, I'm not a Chinese practitioner, but.
And then so why are the doshas combined elements as opposed to why aren't there 5 or 6?
Because
why don't they all have their own elements?
Because this is how they show up together in the body. Ether and air tend to show up together. Fire and a little bit of water tend to show up together. Earth and water tend to show up together, right? And there can be different percentages, but this is how they're mostly organized in the body. And for ease of speaking about them, right? Because they tend to show up together, when we have this concept of doshas, we can easily explain things or easily understand things, right? So you can't just say, I've got too much fire, because fire generally has a little water with it in the body. It's very rare. You wouldn't have fire just by itself in the body because you'd be burned.
Fire and air would never, you know what I'm
They
saying?
can.
That's the other thing too, like, so why isn't there something for like fire and air and earth and ether?
Because they wouldn't show up together. Earth and ether wouldn't, unless Earth was filling the space, but that would be something out of balance, and we'd say kapha's in a vata space, which happens when you have a cold. Right now, you've got kapha in your vata areas, right? And fire and air, if they're together, chances are something really bad's happening because the winds of vata are flaming the fire of pitta, right? They're fanning it, causing flame up. So when we look at it like that, we can see why those aren't organized together, because it would be catastrophic to the body, right? We can see why the elements aren't by themselves either, because ether just by itself, space just by itself with nothing to fill it, that doesn't happen, because that would start to be vacuum sort of area, right? It needs the air to keep the space filled unless there's something else there filling the space. And the same goes with the other elements too. But earth and water, they're generally together, right? It's very rare. You couldn't have earth by itself because it tends to be dry, really, really dry. And it would dry without some form of water for cohesion, would just crumble apart. That's why we get osteoporosis. Those are extra dry bones. Too much earth, not enough water, too much air in the spaces, they just fall apart. Does that make sense? Good. All right. You all look a little shell-shocked. So we're going to end. It is now 1700. You are free to either set up for class, take a walk around, or I'll see you next Sunday, unless I see you in between. Like Mara, I'll probably see you Tuesday. What? 5:30. 5:30.